You have 30 days to get out. That was the first thing Karen said to me. No hello, no explanation, just a cold stare and an eviction notice taped to my front door. I was a struggling tenant with nowhere to go. She was the arrogant property manager with power and a grudge. Fast forward 2 years, and I now own the building. She pays me rent every month. And trust me, she knows exactly who I am. You have 30 days to get out. No greeting, no explanation. Just the words, sharp and dry, delivered with the weight of a gavel. I remember standing in the doorway, barefoot, half asleep, holding a chipped coffee mug and staring at the piece of paper fluttering in the breeze. The eviction notice. Yellow, official, cruel. My name is spelled in bold, but unmistakably mine. Karen stood at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, the corners of her mouth twitching with a satisfaction she didn't even bother to hide. She didn't blink. She didn't offer a reason. Just turned and walked away as if what she'd just done was routine, like watering a plant or throwing out trash. I didn't sleep that night. The floor creaked under my pacing feet. My apartment was small, barely livable by most people's standards, but to me it was peace. A one-room refuge with peeling paint, a leaky bathroom tap that I'd fix myself, and a view of a flickering streetlight that felt oddly comforting. Rent was cheap. At least it had been, before Karen took over. Ever since she was appointed property manager, things changed fast. Notices about new rules. Rent hikes. Inspections. Threats. Still, I never expected this. I reread the notice. It cited vague, lease violations, none of which made sense. Loud music? I barely spoke. Unauthorized pet. I didn't even have plants. Non-payment? My rent was paid through the end of the month. But logic didn't matter. When someone wants you gone, they find a way. And Karen had found hers. By the third day, I realized I wasn't going to find help. I tried calling the office. I was routed to voicemail every time. I went to the building manager's office, Karen's office, and the door was locked, lights off. She wasn't interested in discussion. She wanted me out, and she wanted it done quietly. I could hear it in the neighbors' voices, too, those who dared to talk to me. One woman whispered in the hallway, "She's done this before. That's how she gets her bonuses." Flips units. New tenants, higher rent. Others just looked away. I didn't blame them. In buildings like ours, silence was survival. The walls started to close in. Each box I packed felt like giving in. I couldn't afford movers. I didn't even have a place to move to yet. Just a car with a failing starter and some friends who offered half-hearted sympathy, but couldn't take me in. I was running out of time and options. It was the kind of desperation that clings to your skin. That makes you question if maybe you did do something wrong. If maybe this is just what happens to people like you. Quiet, broke, alone. Karen didn't just evict me from my apartment. She evicted me from stability, from certainty, from believing that hard work and humility counted for anything. Then there was the final week. That's when things got worse. Maintenance workers, ones I'd never seen before, started knocking, barging in under the pretense of routine inspections. I watched them with suspicion. They measured things that didn't need measuring. Took photos, muttered into radios. I knew what it meant. The apartment was already listed. She was just waiting for me to leave. One morning, I returned from a job interview to find the lock changed. My key didn't work. My stomach dropped so hard I almost collapsed. I banged on the door, heart pounding. A neighbor, bless her, helped me call the office. No answer. Then, a miracle. The maintenance guy came back and admitted it was a mistake. Said he'd mixed up the unit numbers. He unlocked the door, and I stepped back into my life, rattled. But it was a warning. The next time, it wouldn't be a mistake. I had 5 days left. Karen walked by once more, just before the deadline. She didn't speak. She smiled barely. The kind of smile that tells you this was never personal, because people like you don't even register as real. I wanted to scream, but I just closed the door quietly and sat down in the middle of the room. That was the moment it hit me. She had the power, and she didn't even have to swing hard. Just a flick of the wrist, a signature, and my world unraveled. But I also remember what happened next. I stayed there on the floor for a long time. Hours. Until night crept in and the streetlight outside began its rhythmic blinking. My head rested against the wall, and a thought settled in, slow and cold and solid. This isn't the end. It's the start. I didn't know how. I didn't have a plan. But something shifted that night. Not just in my head, but in my spine. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started feeling something else entirely. Not rage. Not revenge. Something colder. Something sharper. The desire to rise. I gathered my things. What I could fit in the car, I took. What didn't fit, I left behind. No tears. No sentimental goodbyes. Just silence. The final morning came. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just turned the key in the door one last time, looked around the empty apartment, and whispered under my breath. She'll remember me. She didn't hear it, but she would. Soon. Very soon. I slept in my car the first night after leaving. The engine coughed and wheezed in the cold, and I wrapped myself in every jacket I owned, parked just far enough from the building so Karen wouldn't see me. I didn't want her to know how bad things were. Pride's a funny thing. It doesn't keep you warm, but it keeps you human. The next few days blurred together. I drove from parking lot to parking lot, rotating between the 24-hour laundromat and the corner of a quiet industrial street near the train yard. I kept my phone charged at fast food restaurants and used their restrooms to wash up. I couldn't afford shame. Not anymore. I applied for everything. Dishwashing jobs, warehouse shifts, dog walking online gigs. I didn't care what it was as long as it paid something. Every rejection felt like a punch, but I kept standing. The nights were the hardest, cold and silent, filled with doubts that scraped louder than any wind. My mind would replay that moment over and over again. Her voice, her smirk, that eviction notice. And then, the echo of that thought I'd whispered in the empty apartment. She'll remember me. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was something deeper. The need to matter. To not vanish like some disposable piece of furniture she could throw out and replace. One morning I got lucky. A mechanic named Reggie, who caught me napping outside his shop, knocked on the window. I braced for a confrontation, but instead he handed me a cup of coffee and asked if I could help him unload a shipment. I nodded before he finished the sentence. That one shift turned into a week. That week turned into 3. I swept floors, sorted tools, fetched parts. Reggie didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. He paid me cash under the table, and I used every dollar to keep the car running and my phone bill paid. I needed to stay reachable. Eventually, I scraped together enough to rent a room. Barely more than a closet in the back of someone's house. No lease, no furniture, just a mattress on the floor and a single lamp. But it was warm, and it didn't smell like engine oil or fast food wrappers. I could sleep without worrying about someone knocking on my window. In the quiet of that little room, I began to rebuild. There was an old laptop I'd salvaged from the trunk, screen cracked and battery fried. I set it on a milk crate and plugged it in like a lifeline. I started watching videos, hours of them. Real estate investing, credit repair, small business tips, side hustles. At first, it was just something to do at night when I couldn't sleep. But then a pattern started to form. Threads that connected. Words like leverage, cash flow, ownership. The people in the videos didn't look like me, didn't sound like me, but they all had something in common. They started with nothing. I took notes. I studied. I stayed up until dawn more times than I could count. During the day, I worked whatever jobs I could get. Uber, hauling junk, helping Reggie, anything. At night, I was a student of the game. I didn't talk about Karen. Not to anyone. Not even to myself. Not out loud. But her face would flicker across my mind like a watermark on every plan I made. When I watched a video about buying properties with no money down, I imagined her renting one. When I learned about LLCs and corporate ownership, I pictured her try to talk her way through a lease agreement she didn't realize I'd written. I started repairing my credit. It was a slow, grinding process. Letters to bureaus, calls to debt collectors, careful budgeting. I cut everything extra. No takeout, no streaming services, not even decent shoes. Every dollar was accounted for. Every cent had a purpose. Then came a break. I overheard Reggie talking to a customer about an old duplex in foreclosure on the edge of town. Damn place is a mess, he said, laughing. Probably haunted, but I didn't hear the problems. I heard opportunity. I asked him about it after work. He shrugged, told me where to find the listing. It was true. The place was a wreck. But it was cheap, dirt cheap. And with a little creative financing, it was possible. I didn't have enough saved. Not yet. But I'd come far enough to know what was possible. I started looking into partnerships, hard money loans, seller financing. I was no longer just surviving. I was building, quietly, methodically, like a person digging their way out of a prison with a spoon. During this time, I avoided my old neighborhood. I couldn't risk seeing Karen. Not yet. I wasn't ready. But I drove past the building once. Just once. The windows on the third floor had new blinds. Someone else lived in my old apartment. That hurt more than I expected. But then I looked at the foundation, the cracks in the brick, the sag in the gutters. And I smiled, because now I didn't just see what had been taken from me. I saw what I could take back. I wasn't interested in vengeance. Not in the cartoon kind. What I wanted was control. Leverage. The kind that Karen thought she had permanently. I wasn't there yet, but I was on the road. And unlike before, I wasn't walking alone anymore. I had knowledge. I had discipline. And I had something she'd never understand. Patience. People like Karen rely on fear, on silence, on the idea that no one will fight back, that their victims will stay victims. But I had already done the hardest thing, survived her storm. The next time we met, I wouldn't be the one answering the door. She would. And this time, I'd be the one holding the paperwork. It started with a spiral notebook and a pencil I stole from a diner. That night, I drew a rough sketch of the duplex I'd seen online. Lopsided lines, half-labeled rooms, question marks over everything I didn't understand. Underneath it, I wrote one word in block letters. Ownership. It felt absurd. I didn't even own a proper bed. Yet here, I was mapping out real estate investments like some kind of mogul. But I'd read enough by now to know that ownership wasn't about luxury. It was about leverage. And leverage could be built from nothing if you knew how to structure the play. I stopped thinking like a tenant. I started thinking like the people who built the cages I used to live in. Most nights I worked past midnight, huddled over that notebook, filling it with formulas, rent projections, debt-to-income ratios, property tax estimates. I didn't always know what I was writing, but every number pushed me closer to clarity. I was training my mind to hold money differently, to stop treating it like something I begged for and start seeing it as a tool. A weapon, even. One morning, I walked into a local real estate seminar. It was held in the back of a dying hotel, the kind of place where the carpets were always sticky and the water from the taps smelled like iron. Most people there were twice my age and 10 times as overdressed. I wore clean jeans and borrowed confidence. I didn't say much. I listened. That's where I first heard about creative financing. Money doesn't buy buildings, the speaker said. Deals do. I wrote it down, circled it, underlined it. They talked about seller finance deals, lease options, subject to transactions. I didn't understand it all right away, but I understood the feeling, possibility. That seminar was like oxygen. I left with a dozen new ideas and no money, but I wasn't empty. I was loaded with intent. The next phase of the plan started with silence. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. People can't sabotage what they don't know exists. I ghosted distractions, cut off small talk, even stopped texting most of the few friends I had. Every spare moment went into stacking capital and consuming information. My jobs weren't glamorous. I cleaned gutters, flipped junked-out electronics, helped a landlord clear out a flooded basement. That last one was poetic. I remember walking into the rot-soaked lower unit and thinking this used to be me. Underwater, in the dark. But now I was billing hourly. And learning, watching, picking up the language, the mindset, the posture of people who owned buildings. I took side gigs on task apps, made small but strategic flips, old furniture I found on curbs, sold for cash after a little scrubbing and a decent photo. Every dollar I didn't absolutely need went into a new savings account I called Kay. I never said her name, but that letter meant everything. Not for revenge, for transformation. There was one deal I almost took, a sketchy fixer-upper from a guy who claimed to be desperate. Something about it felt off. It was tempting. Cheap, cash only, no questions asked. The old me might have gone for it, but the new me was patient. I was playing long-term now. The goal wasn't just to own property. It was to control it. I built a limited liability company, registered it through an online portal in under 30 minutes. Paid the fee, picked a name that meant nothing but sounded clean. That was the key, facelessness. I didn't want Karen or anyone else knowing what was coming. I worked with a local lender who was willing to look past the usual requirements after seeing my ledger. I came with a stack of documented side income, months of meticulous tracking, and a plan so airtight, he asked me if I'd done this before. I hadn't, but I nodded anyway. The first property I bought wasn't the one I wanted. It was cheaper, older, and on a quieter street. But it was a start. The deal closed on a rainy Tuesday. I signed the papers in a bland office while a clock ticked loud on the wall. I walked out holding a key that didn't feel real. I kept staring at it in my hand, waiting for someone to call me back inside and say there'd been a mistake. But no one did. That night, I stood inside the empty living room of my first property. No furniture, no heat, just echoing walls and cracked tile. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just stood there and breathed. Deep, slow breaths. The kind that remind you you're still alive. That you didn't disappear. That you made it out. This was the first step. I didn't know then that Karen's building would come up for sale. Not yet. But I was watching. Waiting. Practicing. I bought a second unit a few months later, this one in a better neighborhood. I didn't live there. I rented it out. I used what I'd learned to negotiate the deal. Low interest, delayed payments, minor seller carryback. All above board. All legitimate. But most importantly, all mine. The plan was taking shape. Slowly, painfully, but with precision. I started checking the listings in my old zip code weekly. That's when I saw it. Listed under a corporate seller, bank-owned. The building. Her building. For units, listed well below market value due to a recent code violation and structural issues. It was a mess. And it was perfect. I drove past it 3 times before I pulled over and stared. Same peeling paint. Same broken step at the entrance that she never fixed. Same grim, gray sky above it. But this time, I wasn't looking for shelter. I was looking for entry. I made the call that afternoon. Posed as a representative for my LLC. Asked for a viewing. The agent barely glanced at me during the walkthrough. I took notes, pointed out flaws, made noise about repair costs. It was all part of the game. A week later, I made an offer, under asking price, with a tight closing window. They accepted. Karen still didn't know. She was still working there. Still running her little kingdom with clipped emails and cold hallway glances. She didn't know the foundation beneath her was shifting. She had no idea who now owned the ground she stood on. But she would soon. The seed was planted. And this time, I wasn't growing toward survival. I was growing toward power. The papers were signed on a Thursday morning. I sat in a sterile conference room across from a man in a navy suit who didn't look up once from the stack of documents. Just initials here, signature there. Form after form slid across the table. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask questions. I'd studied every word of the agreement 3 times over the night before. This wasn't luck. It wasn't a handout. This was execution. The building was mine. Technically, it belonged to the LLC. The name on the documents was generic, something forgettable, designed that way on purpose. There was no mention of me. No clue, no echo of the tenant she once pushed out like trash. That part mattered. I didn't want her to know yet. When I stepped out of that building, a manila folder in my hand and a chill in the air, something deep inside me shifted. It wasn't joy. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, like the low hum of electricity. I wasn't done. I hadn't even started. The first time I entered the property as the owner, it felt off. Not because it was unfamiliar. No, I knew every creak, every corner of that place. I'd lived here once, but now the air was different. Like stepping back onto a battlefield long after the war has ended, but knowing the blood is still in the soil. I didn't go to her office that day. I made sure she wasn't working. I walked the halls alone, keys jingling in my pocket. I passed my old apartment, now occupied by someone else. Someone who had no idea what happened there. I paused outside that door. I didn't touch it, just stood there for a long moment and then kept walking. The place was a mess. The former owners had let it go to hell. Broken gutters, rusted railings, a cracked foundation that needed sealing. But I didn't see problems. I saw leverage. Every flaw was a reason I negotiated the price down. Every needed repair was part of the plan. I'd already lined up contractors, cheap, efficient, quiet. No big crews. No signage. I wanted this quiet. Invisible. Karen still managed the building. Somehow, through turnover and restructuring, she'd remained. Still handing out notices, still slamming doors, still smiling with that same razor-thin grin. She was the kind of person who made herself too useful to fire, but too miserable to respect. She wasn't the owner. She never had been. Just someone granted temporary power and convinced it was permanent. That made what came next even better. The first official change I made was paperwork. I replaced the management agreement. Legally, the LLC was now the property owner, and we were reevaluating site operations. That meant Karen was on borrowed time, even if she didn't know it yet. I hired an outside property consultant to begin reviewing tenant files and lease terms. All official, all distant, still faceless. Every email came from the LLC's address. Every request was routed through third parties. When she sent questions, dry, clipped, borderline rude, she got short, professional replies. She never suspected me. I wasn't a name in her inbox. I was an algorithm, a shadow. Then came the audit. It was routine, on paper, a standard inspection, but it brought everything to the surface. Lease discrepancies, unauthorized fees, tenant complaints that had been buried. I didn't have to fabricate anything. Her track record did the work for me. I just had to highlight it, organize it, present it. When the final report landed in her lap, I knew exactly when she read it. Her office door slammed. Tenants whispered in the hall. She spent 2 days pacing the building like a storm cloud. Then, the inevitable email. I'd like to speak directly with ownership. That was the moment I'd waited for. I had the meeting arranged. Neutral ground. A nearby office space I'd rented by the hour for such occasions. Professional setting, polished table, neutral walls. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. I wanted her to see what she'd never seen before. Me. She arrived 5 minutes early. Always punctual. Always sharp, pressed, prepared. She walked in like she owned the place. Then she saw me. She froze, not visibly, not dramatically, just long enough for me to catch it. That flicker, the blink, the twitch in her jaw, the part of her brain scrambling to connect the face across the table with the one she thought she erased. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I waited. Are you? She started. I nodded, slowly. Yes. Her posture faltered for a half-second. She recovered quickly. Years of wielding power don't evaporate overnight. She tried to take control of the conversation, asking questions, clarifying terms. I listened. Let her talk. Let her stumble through the reality that she no longer held the leash. Then I handed her the new contract. She read it, line by line. She flipped to the back page. This terminates my authority over site operations. It doesn't terminate your job, I said. It just changes who you report to. She looked up. Her expression shifted. Anger, confusion, and something else. A quiet kind of panic. Not fear. Not yet. But the first taste of it. I'm still responsible for this property? She asked, voice smaller now. For now, I said. She blinked again. She wanted to fight, to argue. But the words didn't come. Because now, everything she said could be documented. And she was sitting across from the one person she never thought she'd see again. I stood. The meeting was over. As I walked past her, I paused at the door. I turned just slightly and said, You used to give people 30 days. I'll give you 90. Then I left. I didn't look back. The building was mine now. So was the silence. She knocked on the door 3 times. Firm, measured, just like she used to knock on mine. It was early, just past 8. The building's common hallway was still dim, the cheap fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. Her heels echoed against the linoleum floor as she waited, clipboard tucked under one arm, a pen between her fingers like a weapon. She didn't know yet. Not really. But something in her posture said she suspected. Or maybe just hoped she was wrong. I watched from the other side of the door. Silent. Still. When I finally opened it, she didn't flinch. She stood there with the professionalism she perfected over years of treating people like problems. But her eyes, that's where I saw it. Recognition. Not full. Not immediate. Just a flicker. A delay. Like a memory, trying to surface but hitting resistance. Good morning, she said, rehearsed and crisp. I'm here on behalf of the property's management office. We're doing a final review of tenant records before ownership completes the transition. I have a few questions." Her voice faltered on that last sentence. Just a little. Just enough. I didn't respond right away. I stepped back, slowly, letting the door open wider. She hesitated before entering. That hesitation, it was everything. The first crack in the wall. The apartment was clean, spare. No clutter. Nothing personal. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a folder sitting in the center. Her eyes scanned the room, taking it in, trying to place me. She hadn't figured it out yet. That part made it better. "Please," I said. "Sit." She sat, shoulders tight, chin high. The pen now rested between her fingers like a barrier. "I've reviewed your submitted reports," I continued, calm even, "and I have some clarifying questions regarding lease renewals, prior evictions, and reported maintenance requests." She blinked. Once. Twice. Her grip on the pen shifted. This wasn't the tone she expected. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. "You filed an eviction on a tenant 2 years ago," I said, tapping the folder. "Unit 3B. Claimed unauthorized occupants. No noise complaints on record. No violations logged by maintenance." Curious. Now the recognition bloomed. Full, brutal, undeniable. She inhaled sharply, the pen slipping from her hand and clattering to the table. She knew. "You," she said. One word. Quiet. "Hello." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. That was the first time I'd heard her voice without control behind it. "I'm a new owner," I said, steady, "through an entity that now fully owns this building. You've been reporting to me, indirectly, for nearly 2 months." She didn't speak, just stared. I watched her rebuild the story in her head. Every interaction, every email, every ignored call, now recontextualized. She looked at me like someone trying to find the edge of a mirror that reflects something impossible. "I didn't know," she started. "No," I said. "You didn't. And that's the point." Silence filled the room. A thick, heavy thing. For a moment, the air between us wasn't made of oxygen. It was made of memory. Of every door she slammed. Every threat she whispered. Every paper she taped to a wall like a death sentence. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to lecture. The weight of it all was settling on her shoulders, piece by piece, and she couldn't stop it. "I've reviewed your management style," I said, finally, flipping through the folder. "Your pattern of tenant displacement, your profit-driven turnover strategy, your intimidation tactics. Very efficient. Sarcasm isn't always sharp. Sometimes it's surgical. You." She stopped herself again. "You were in 3B. I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to." She remembered. That moment in her office when I'd stood on the other side of the desk, pleading for time. That expression she wore when she told me, "This isn't personal." It was all there now. A reel playing behind her eyes. "I've made decisions regarding the future of this property," I said. "Effective next month, we'll be transitioning to a new management protocol. You can finish out the quarter if you wish. With supervision." Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, then paused. For the first time, I saw her consider her words not out of confidence, but fear. "I did what I was told," she said, softer now. "I followed policy." "No," I replied. "You made people feel disposable. You called it business, but it was cruelty, dressed up as authority." She stood too quickly. Her chair scraped backward across the floor. "Is this some kind of revenge?" she asked, voice rising now, color flooding her face. "Is that what this is?" I looked at her, finally allowing a small, cold smile. "No. Revenge would have been evicting you without warning. Revenge would have been waiting until rent was due, then locking your office." She blinked. "This," I continued, "is restraint." For a moment, she just stood there, disarmed, uncertain. It was all slipping. Her practice posture, her corporate tone, the control she'd relied on like a second skin. Now she was just a woman in a room with someone who remembered everything. She gathered her things in silence. The pen, the clipboard, her pride, as much of it as she could. At the door, she paused, turned. "I suppose," she said slowly, "this is what I get." "No," I said. "This is just the beginning of what you deserve." And then she left. No final words. No dramatic exit. just footsteps fading down a hallway she no longer ruled. When the door shut, I didn't celebrate. I didn't breathe a sigh of relief. I just sat back down, opened the folder again, and got back to work. Because power isn't about revenge. It's about never being powerless again. She knocks now, not just when she enters the office, but when she sends emails, when she asks questions, even when she walks past me in the hallway. Not literally, no, but it's there, in the way she lowers her voice, in how she triple-checks a form before submitting it, in how she stands straighter, quieter, always waiting for a signal. It's subtle, but unmistakable. The dynamic has flipped. It didn't happen all at once. After that meeting, she returned to the building with a stiff jaw and a new politeness. Forced, unnatural, the kind that leaves a bitter taste. She started replying to every message within minutes. Began asking for approval on decisions she used to make with impunity. It wasn't fear, not outright. It was awareness. A cold, creeping realization that she no longer held the key. That every move she made now was observed. Measured. For weeks, I said nothing. I let her perform professionalism like a ritual. I let her guess. Then came the review. Officially, it was a standard quarterly performance assessment. But we both knew what it really was. Her 90 days were almost up. Her temporary leash had unraveled to its end. We met again in the same neutral space. No theatrics. No raised voices. I handed her the document. There were no outbursts. She didn't plead. Just read in silence. You'll receive a severance package, I said calmly, and a letter of recommendation, if you want one, based on the version of your work from the last 3 months. That made her look up, a flicker of disbelief, or maybe confusion. You're letting me go? She asked. You're free to pursue other opportunities, I said. There was a pause. I thought you'd fire me on day one. I leaned back slightly, eyes level with hers. You thought wrong. Truth was, I had thought about it. Many times. But not because I wanted revenge. That's the thing people never understand. Revenge burns fast. Why I wanted had taken root deeper than that. I didn't want to punish her. I wanted to replace her. Quietly. Cleanly. To prove something. To her, yes, but mostly to myself. She accepted the decision with a nod. No resistance. The Karen from 2 years ago might have fought, might have threatened lawyers, or bluffed her way into an extension. But that woman had been dismantled piece by her own behavior. I didn't have to crush her. I just had to step out of the role she once forced me into. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. When she left the building for the last time, she didn't slam the door. She didn't even look back. She carried a small box of her belongings, papers, a mug, a few pens, and disappeared down the block like any other former employee. Unremarkable. But I remembered. I remembered everything. And then, slowly, I started forgetting. That's the price people don't talk about. The aftermath. Because once you climb your way out, once you get what you said you wanted, the question becomes, what now? You think you'll feel whole. You think closure is a destination. But it isn't. It's a hallway with no lights. Just doors you keep walking past until you realize some don't open. And some shouldn't. I didn't throw a party. I didn't tell anyone what happened. There was no victory lap. Just more paperwork. Contractor invoices. Rent adjustments. Lease renegotiations. Owning something is messier than dreaming about it. But the difference is, now I make the mess. There's a tenant here who reminds me of who I used to be. Quiet. Keeps to themselves. Always pays on time. Always says thank you. Karen had flagged them as a problem tenant once. Said they had a look. Whatever that meant. I reviewed their file. Nothing stood out. So I knocked on their door one day. Introduced myself. Not as the owner. Just as someone who wanted to make sure things were working. They nodded, surprised. Told me the heating had been off for a week last winter, and no one ever came. I had it fixed the next day. Small things. Tiny shifts in how the world turns. That's what power really is. Not control, not dominance, but the ability to decide what kind of person you'll be when no one's watching. Karen had power and used it to make people smaller. I use it to remember how small I once felt, and to make sure no one in my building ever feels it the same way again. There are days when I still think about that eviction notice. I remember the paper curled at the edge, the ink bleeding slightly from rain. Her handwriting on the envelope. I keep it locked in a drawer. Not to gloat, not even to remember, but to measure, to hold it up metaphorically to where I am now and whisper to myself, never again. Not because I'm angry, because I survived, and because survival is only the beginning. The real journey is in what you build after the storm clears, in who you become when the door slams shut behind someone like Karen, and you're the one holding the key. She knocks now, but I don't answer, not because I'm cruel, but because I already did, and I'm done.